Another map, another case study. For this one, I sketched out the very rough vision that I had in my head, and knew that for the train I could probably use Genland in the same way that I did for the Great Wall, going through various generations and acquiring a couple pieces from each. I started recording a little late, so I'll fill in here with some footage of me recreating the first few steps. First was to find a ridgeline in Genland. Here in the reproduction I got lucky with a generation that was diagonal, which I could just rotate in the move tool, but in the original effort, the ridges I was coming across weren't quite long enough to go from map edge to opposite map edge. So I'm just going to pretend that my ridgeline ended here. To finish the ridge in the original, I grabbed the piece that I had, copied it to a new layer, flipped it in the move tool, shoved it to the end, and then merged back in. I then shifted it a little bit sideways, used image crop to box to discard the extra pieces, and then manually edited the seam in the middle, deleting bigger parts with the rect select tool and making larger adjustments with the smooth tool to make it look more natural. Then there was the second Genland piece to create some nice believable lowlands. Back when I made the sketch, I think I had an old tribes map in mind that may have even been converted to Ace of Spades at some point. Tank mentioned on the Voxel Cardopy Discord that it reminded him of Blood Gulch and Battle Creek from Halo, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't either of those, but I'm yet to figure out exactly which map I thought about. If I find it, I'll put it in the comments. Either way, maps from these games were often mirrored, and while I'm not generally a fan of true mirrors, I did decide to make the map at least rotationally similar initially. So I took a clone of the mountains and rotated that 180 degrees. The mound upon which I'd put the bunker came about by going on to the mountain layer, box selecting the top of one of the peaks, copying that to placer, and then putting on a plane snap, and then dotting that peak around in the same sort of area to make the kind of size that I wanted. And from here is where we join the actual start of the original footage. For the main area of the bunker, I kept my mouse still, used a big spherical brush with 1Z height to place the circle, used the hotkey I to switch to subtract mode for the brush, lessened the brush size using the square bracket hotkeys, and then clicked again to create the gap for the central courtyard. On a new layer, I used the square shape, cut out the bit I didn't want, and then merged it back in with the original layer. I could then extrude the whole thing upwards, and then use the fuzzy select's hollow feature to create the space inside it. To very quickly remove the roof, I just extruded it negatively by one block. This allowed me easier access to work on the inside, and to re-add the roof later, there were a bunch of options to do this. I could have just duplicated the bunker, moved it upwards, and then box or rect selected everything out except the old floor, but for some reason in this case I just extruded a few times instead. Either way you do it, I can wholeheartedly recommend splitting buildings into separate layers, each one generally with the flooring and the walls for that single floor of the building, and a separate layer for the roof. This way you can easily use the tab key or the button on the layer to focus in without being obstructed by other parts of the structure. Beyond the bunker, the vast majority of my time was spent sculpting, smoothing and painting. I realised early on that the colours from Genland were actually going to be the best, so the custom parts I wanted to make would need to be manually done. I'm actually going to peek a little bit into the future here in this video, just to cover all the brushwork in one go. For the train itself, I used two ways. The first was to blend the Genland pieces in with the rest of the map, for which I would do most of the heavy lifting using the smoothing tool with some light noise. The second was the more fine-grained approach, using a single block-high brush snapped to the plane which I moved about using hotkeys. For most of the painting, I had dithering set at 1.5 and anti-alias set at 2 to create reasonably natural blended edges, and I had some light colour noise enabled. Most of the time I also had surface paint enabled, which takes the XY area of the brush and paints all voxels within it that are exposed to air. It completely disregards the verticality of where your brush is. The only times I turned this off were for parts where verticality was actually important, like the floors of tunnels, for example, where you don't want the ceiling of the tunnel or maybe blocks on the surface to change. Given that I wanted to retain much of Genland's colouring style, I also used Control-Click on pre-existing parts of the map to copy the colour into the brush. Back to live time, having made one mound, I decided to use a high plane in the top-down camera to plan out what the rest of the map might look like. I did ponder whether to use this plan with the Plan Roads filter, but because I wanted a few different sizes and colours of road, and because I knew I was going to be manually painting the train anyway, I decided against it and just used this opportunity just to plan out the vague layout of the map. It didn't take too long editing one side's mountain to realise that adding in an archway was going to be the coolest thing I could put in on the sides. In the middle, I originally thought I was just going to dip the hill and put the road in like a shallow area there, but I later realised that the much more likely real-world scenario would be that whoever made the road would simply carve out the hill and put the road in it, so I did that instead. It was at this stage, with the overall layout mostly in place, that I saved to a new file and merged all of the train layers into one: the mountains and its clone, the middle lowland train, and the bunker mounds directly into a single layer. This would then allow me to blend and add details that were going to be mirrored. After a long period of train editing and painting, I then revisited the plan. I'd put these circles in to represent boulders, so very much like how I created the bunker mounds initially, I just copied the top of the roundest peak I could find into the placer, scaled it a bit, and then merged it in with the train layer, doing some manual painting and smoothing to help them fit in. To place the trees, I again used the Generate Doodad placement filter trick again, where I duplicated the train layer, scrubbed out anywhere I didn't want trees, and then forced the filter to use that cut up layer as the reference for where it could place things. One last detail I wanted to add was a tunnel for defenders to enter their bunker with, which ended up looking like this. To make it, I began by drawing the exit and making a note of the coordinates, specifically its Y and Z value in this case. I then moved inside the bunker and created the passageway down and along to those coordinates. I then had to go into the train layer and carve out the blocks it had inside. Because the bunkers at the opposite ends of the map are clones of each other, the tunnel shape automatically mirrored to it. I only had to carve out the terrain over there and change a little of the surroundings to finish it off. And with that, Standoff Gulch is basically complete. I named it with Gulch to point towards the Halo maps it appears to resemble, and Standoff because the layout loosely resembles a map by that name that I made maybe 15 years ago now. How far mapping has come since those days.